we've written a series of 3 articles, sort of looking at the commonalities and differences between what Positive Money UK are proposing and what MMT say. So probably going to cover some of those things and other things he's been working on. And there was going to be Rachel Oliver who was going to come and present, but she thought that because Rob had been working in this area more intimately, he would run this course. So it says Rachel Oliver in your schedules that I printed out yesterday, but last night it was changed to, how I was informed that it was changed to Rob Macquarie. And also, the night before last, I found out that Professor Paul Davidson could not come to the conference. He emailed me and said that he had a family emergency. He was in Chicago, and but he had to go back to Knoxville, Tennessee. So we hope everything's okay there. But we're going to try and keep in touch with him. And but apart from that, most of the rest of the schedule is pretty much the same. Well, it's the same as what you got yesterday.
Start with video.
Yeah, Rob is relatively new to Positive Money. He's only been there maybe just over a year. Positive Money have a paid staff of about 8 to 10 people, and they've, for most of their time since they've been established, they've had economists on their staff to sort of engage with other economists and do the analysis and things that economists do. So it's and Positive Money were sort of the initiators of the International Movement for Monetary Reform, which is the meeting that we went to. A lot of us from here went to in Utrecht in May this year, and it was very good, to get together with leading monetary reformers from other countries, and there was a lot of good discussion. And the contingent that came over from North America to there were very well received, and actually I think we had an impact there, and a good impression, and we sort of helped to influence the way that the discussion went. Like Professor Yamaguchi was talking about moving towards a way of bypassing going through central banks and banks and sort of going around that using the other alternatives like the EPM that he's developing. So it's very, it's a very exciting time again to be a monetary reformer, and the new technology we can use it to our advantage. Okay, it looks like he's not hooked up yet. Oh yeah, is there any more reflection or feedback on what Professor Yamaguchi mentioned and what we were discussing at the end of yesterday? And well, I'll just, if we can't get Rob, we'll get Sue up here, because she's got to sort of follow on from what Rob's going to talk about with her experience at the same conference in New York City not long ago.
I was wondering, any thoughts about Yamaguchi is this electronic public money, and you have this authority, and you can not use the banks, and you can do it without the central bank, so we're getting very close to a local currency. How does the money get into the circulation in the first place? What is the initiation process? So that was a question, and
That's my question too.
hi, Rob.
Sorry.
Can you hear us, Rob?
Yes, I can now. Sorry about that. Technical setup.
Okay, Rob, we've sort of briefly introduced you. You're economist at Positive Money UK. You're based in London, and you've worked on a few papers, like the Greening Bank of England, and most recently you've written a series of articles looking at Positive Money's proposals and MMT lens. And you attended the conference in New York not long ago, so that's basically all the guidance you've got for this session, and it was only decided that you were going to be here instead of Rachel yesterday, so please everybody give a warm welcome to Rob Macquarie from our sister organisation in the UK.
Sorry, the sound has just gone a bit funny. Can you say something again, Jamie?
At least we can hear him last.
Yeah, I was just saying how.
Okay, just the microphone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can hear you fine, so I won't repeat.
I heard your introduction.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you everyone for having me on the phone. Yeah, I should stress that I heard about this goings on, this convening, and I'm filling in for this slot. I heard about it 24 hours ago, so forgive me for what will seem like a lack of structure. So what we're going to go through. But and I also was under the impression that mostly I would be taking questions, so I'll try and keep really brief what I'm going to say. But yeah, thank you for the introduction, Amy. So at Positive Money UK, which I have been working at for a year and a month, or thereabouts, we've done quite a wide range of research activity over the past the past year, and actually going a bit further back than that. Can I just check that everyone can hear me okay before I go on?
Yes.
Yes.
Thumbs up?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. That's what I like to see. So, yeah, I'll speak briefly about some work on environment that we've been doing. But then I understand the brief I was presented for this talk was that everybody would have a lot to ask and be interested in about our work with thinking about MMT, modern monetary theory, and how that relates to positive money. So I'm sure that's kind of going to exercise the meeting quite a lot, so we'll get onto that. But initially, I'll just say that we did some work on environmental finance and central banks, which has become quite a big field, especially in Europe, for those of you who are following European central banking and monetary financial discussions. If you're from the US, this might be the first time you've ever heard of this whole initiative, because the Fed is extremely slow on any of this, and kind of conspicuous absence from international efforts when it comes to environmental, local carbon finance and central banking. But as far as the rest of the world is concerned, I don't know how much everyone will be familiar with this topic, so I'll do a sort of whirlwind run through. It's become absolutely part of the canon that climate change constitutes a massive risk to the financial and economic system, besides all the other catastrophic impacts it could have. And that has started to panic financial policymakers who are aware that they don't really understand the kind of risks that are presented by this shift. They don't really understand the pace at which it might happen. They don't really understand the levers they might have to push on to manage the financial system and prepare it for a world where global warming is a fact of daily life. So the Bank of England did some prominent work on this, and that's obviously informed Positive Money UK's view on the matter, because we're trying to influence the Bank of England. And I wrote a paper that came out in May, as the name called a green paper, which proposed reforming the legal mandate that the Bank of England has. There might be trade-offs or links or even win-win situations between its traditional role of managing price stability and newer role of managing financial stability and achieving a much faster transition, low carbon transition. And this is kind of an active area of advocacy we haven't done a campaign on it, but an active area of work nonetheless for kind of a lot of the whole organisation in London. I guess I'll just speak to Positive Money's slight shift. I know some of you guys might be old hands to the monetary reform world, and Positive Money's been around longer than I've been there, and it used to be much more about a particular proposal, which is the sovereign money system, and a strategic shift in what Positive Money UK is trying to work on has been to emphasise the values and outcomes that we want to see in the economy. So the tagline being a money and banking system that supports a fair, democratic and sustainable economy. That shift in emphasis, i.e. looking at the outcomes and any policies are up for grabs that help promote those outcomes, fair, democratic and sustainable. That shift has allowed us to get into these conversations, which are kind of emergent new paths for what central banking might be, what the management of the money system might be. So that's opened up some real new territory for the organisation, which is really exciting, and I'm very pleased that very lucky that I've been able to work on that front. But as well as all that green stuff I've just been talking about, we've also got some active research going on, which is two programs which are more in line with the Positive Money of old, which involves rewriting and modernising money. My colleague Constantine is working on that. So the hope is that in some point in 2019 there'll be a second edition of Modernising Money coming out. And second project, which I'm not sure how much everyone in the room will be aware of, but a research website called The Money Question, intended to serve as a forum, networking space for everybody interested in monetary reform from all angles, to share knowledge, but also to exchange views and debate, upload their own work, contribute to blogs. This website will hopefully be launched towards the end of this year. I think it's 6 weeks from now. That's Matt Lyons is working on that. So that's extremely exciting, and that will be some content that is much more familiar to people who know Positive Money UK from its sovereign money system advocacy days. So that's an update on all of those things. I've been briefed to talk about MMT, so I'll quickly say that I attended a conference in New York City about modern monetary theory, which was incredibly informative for me because I'm interested in the macroeconomic questions that modern monetary MMT raises. But of course also they're a very active constituency in the whole question of reforming money and finance. And don't always see eye to eye with campaigners who've worked for the banking or variants of reform like that. And so trying to understand that relationship and understand the perspective of the MMT is, because we've had a lot of pressure, well not pressure is not the right word, but a lot of interest indicated by UK-based supporters who are really enthusiastic about MMT and want to understand it better and want to know what we think about it. And that interest and enthusiasm meant that we felt it was justified to do some reaching out, do some relationship constructing, and see where we can close misunderstandings, see where we can build new understandings, because the MMT cohort is big and it's growing, and it's probably going to continue to get quite a lot of attention. So the more we can be involved in that nexus of activity and interest, the better. Of course, as I'm sure we'll kind of get into in some questions now, there are some trade-offs to be thought of there in terms of what kind of policy implications these different perspectives have, and whether you can reconcile them, and whether you can sort of accept bits of one school's idea without people just epistemic confusion, we might say, of people not really knowing what you're about anymore. I'd love to hear all of your views on that question, because you are also devoted to this area, and hopefully we can have a productive exchange. So I'll leave my little blurb there. I can't see Jamie if you're there to manage the puppet.
Yes, thank you, Rob. Yeah,
You're on mute, by the way, so I'm afraid I can't hear you.
Oh, yeah, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. That was a good little overview, and you were talking about trade-offs, and have you come to any conclusion about what trade-offs positive money might be willing to make?
So this is with respect to MMT.
Yes.
You're asking that. So one thing that I had an impression of MMT over that was confirmed while I interacting with various its advocates at various levels of the spectrum, between the original academics who developed the agenda and the people who are just simply interested and watch the media and watch real progressives and all of this side. This concerns language and how we speak about certain bits of the monetary system. And I just had this notion that MMTers really, really care about certain phrases. Sorry, can I just get a quick show of hands that everybody knows roughly what I'm talking about when we talk about MMT? Hands down, and anybody that hasn't the foggiest idea what I'm saying when I say that acronym. Can you put your hand up? Okay, we'll have a quick overview, I think. It's a complicated thing. We don't want to leave people behind. Modern monetary theory is it's an economic paradigm, a macroeconomic paradigm, that has been worked on by some key actors. It's a small group of academics, mostly based in the US, but one in Australia, and I forget. But they've been working on it for something like 25 years, and they developed a view of the entire macroeconomy and the monetary system that grows out of the theory of, sort of what money is, where it comes from, and it's very chartless, if you know that phrase, in its views, in that the state is the originator of money, and when you start from that perspective, you end up reaching the conclusion that you should have a much greater role for the public money supply, yes, but also by comparison with monetary reform, which seeks to limit the power of banks to make this to grow the money supply. Modern monetary theory is sort of far happier to just emphasize the state's ability and play up that as a kind of counterbalancing force. And their conviction is that everything, all of their understanding of the entire macroeconomy and its systematic properties flows from their balance sheet based analysis of where money comes from, starts and goes. So that they are of this conviction that if you agree with them on their premises, then the rest follows. So that's a point of contention. So hopefully that's a quick, that's brought people up to speed a bit, but it's an incredibly complicated thing, and lots is getting written online, and lots of quite varying quality, so it does take a while to wade through, but I'm sure the collective knowledge in this room can pull together some ideas to check out more afterwards. I'll just return to that question, Jamie, you asked about the trade-offs. So certain language, certain linguistic forms that we can adopt that very straightforwardly appease the MMT crowd is an extremely easy move to make, and that doesn't entail actually changing the policy proposal that we're arguing for. Positive Money UK has been pushing for so-called sovereign money creation for quite a while now, aka QE for people, just on the basis that we've had this QE, and you can use QE to point to the possibility of public money creation, but also the choice over how you do it. Sovereign money creation is just not a policy that really squares with the MMT platform, because while they think that the state can create money and does so all the time when it spends, they wouldn't be happy with the kind of institutional constraints that sovereign money creation entails. That's not something that positive money is going to change on just because we've gone to an MMT conference. So the way we're not going to propose just straightforward fiscal spending rather than looking at the central bank like we've always done, because that's the great detriment of our organisation. So there are some things that are quite easy to bend on, and there are some things that we definitely won't, but that it doesn't matter that we won't, in my opinion. So it's all about finding that, communicating with MMTers and trying to express this fact, and developing an understanding that between us and them, that the bits where we agree are really the ones that most people hear about. Like if you are a member of the public and you are you are an audience, target audience for Positive Money UK or for an MMT academic working in America, you're probably only going to hear the bits where our platforms align. You're going to hear those phrases and words, and getting those right and getting those coherent across different platforms that are all struggling for quite a similar view of the world is really important.
Thank you, that's a good answer. Just out of interest, we've got a lineup of speakers here, and people aren't as angry as I thought they might be, so that's good. At the conference, did they discuss what proportion of the current money supply they think is public money now?
No, the conference was actually surprisingly light on monetary detail, like with these questions, because the structure of it was such that they had a couple of introductory panels from the big academic figures who people here in this room might know the names of. But then they moved into having some panels from organisers, people who are trying to work towards a job guarantee in the US. At this point it became a bit more US focused, and my British political mind didn't really quite follow what was the thrust of some of the session. But the upshot was that there was more about organising and campaign and the nature of MMT as a movement and the different factors, how it's organised, how it can be coherent. There was more on that than there was on the theoretical detail. So.
Okay, thank you, that's interesting. And I'll start with our questions. Nick Ignatz, he's been a campaigner in northwest Ohio, Indiana, for many years.
It's all the same, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie. Hi, Rob. I would like to, you're an economist. I don't get a chance to talk to too many economists, really. And I read papers that economists write and everything, but I'm a very simple person. And I think that whatever our money system is, and whatever our money system should be something that an economist can explain to the general public and they can understand. And if you're unable to do that, I'm not picking on you here, but if economists are unable to present to us in an understandable, simple manner how our money system works, then we need to change it. And to me, I've read things by MMT, I read things that MMTers write and everything, and I can't even begin to understand what they're trying to say. And not that I'm putting you in a position that you want to explain that, because maybe it's unexplainable. And the other thing, you mentioned that you wrote a paper, I believe it was on the environmental finance in the central bank, or some sort of linkage there. And I'd like the name of the paper so that we could perhaps read it here. Thank you. If you'd like to address any of my tirade.
Sure, so the name of the, thanks for your question. The name of the paper is A Green Bank of England. It's available on the Positive Money website. If you go into, probably better to just Google search it. We've had a website switch around kind of every couple of months, but otherwise we can get the internal sitemap link to it. So just search Positive Money UK, A Green Bank of England. On your point about economists understanding the monetary system, I totally agree with you that one of the, or if anything, the essential issue of our current monetary and financial system is its complexity and its opaqueness, and the fact that it has grown into a vast, I mean, what's the name of that film? The Spider's Web, or the Spider? Yeah,
Web of Death.
Web of Death.
Something like that. Any of those metaphors, take your pick. It's impossible to understand. It's really, really intricate, and it's shrouded in secrecy, to be frank, because nobody in their right mind would design the mechanisms that investment banks, but also all of the funds and trusts and offshore entities that engage in the modern money system. Nobody would design that stuff and make it intelligible to the everyday member of the public, because then it would get shut down straight away. So I agree with you that economists should, in their world, be scryers of this system and kind of read the charts and be able to interpret it. I would just like to emphasize that economics teaches you how to think about certain problems, and it teaches you perspectives. It teaches you a bit about theorized hypothetical mechanisms of interaction between different agents in the economy. But you guys study money, so you know that economics is just so far wrong on certain issues. For me, the current moment represents a little bit of a paradox, in that you have lots of stuff being written, certainly in the paper, I imagine, taking shots and receiving them in turn. A lot is going on about macroeconomics being in crisis. Economics is often said to be in crisis, but really it's kind of macro that's having the total breakdown. But at the same time, we're in a very troubled time. We're in a time where some of the relationships, political relationships, social relationships we thought would always hold, aren't really holding anymore. And we're looking to people to interpret the system and say to us, well, what's going to happen if this drastic policy changes? And it's not just in money, it's also in trade. People just don't really understand what's going to happen if, you get tariffs on steel between China and America. Everyone's just freaking out about it, to be frank. And economists aren't going to have the answer.
We're having trouble understanding here too about the trade. We're having trouble understanding the trade policies here too.
Yeah, tell me about it. You want to talk about trade policy, look at my government. But what I'm trying to say is that economists, the economic establishment has dropped the ball.
Rob, we've got a lot of other questions, so.
Okay, I apologize, I can't see the queue,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
you
no.
could kind of give
Yeah, they're sort of off to the side, lining up here. So we just want to go quick fire, and then if there's more detailed questions, we can email them to you. You can email replies to
All right.
people, and I'll circulate
Okay.
it and all that.
Hi, Rob. It's
Sorry for that.
Paul Lavoie.
Hello.
Hi. I think there was. Hello? Okay, I didn't get some of the story when you did. There was initial fear from among us.
Close to
several
your
of us.
mouth.
It gets distorted, so.
That's better.
Okay. And it's very encouraging to hear that Positive Money is not thinking of giving up its position of sovereign money creation. But I will say that MMT will never agree to that. So I'm not sure, and that's a fundamental tenet of positive money and monetary reform. So I'm not sure how we can reconcile those two severe differences. Also, modern monetary theory is really an American phenomenon, and I strongly encourage you to reach out to some of the people here. We've had a long history of reaching out to modern monetary theorists, and it's really not worked out very well. So I think you could learn from the critiques of modern monetary theory on our side here, what we've gone through in reaching out to them, and why we've essentially at this point given up, realizing the differences seem almost irreconcilable. It's really a one-way kind of interaction with modern monetary theory. They refuse to even entertain. And I'm curious, and maybe the question I'll leave you with, is what was their response to you being there? And was there any openness to what positive money was espousing? And lastly, when you talk about language, I think that is one of the key issues with modern monetary theory, is that they use the language in a different way that most people understand, and why it's so difficult for people to grasp what they're talking about. They use words that mean different things, and so it's a matter of definition very often. So again, I'm curious to what their response was to the presence of positive money at their conference.
They loved it.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Should I do this one, or should we take a few, and I'll just try and get through them to make sure we don't run out of time?
Rob, I'm going to give a similar question, and I think you could respond to Paul and myself at the same time. I think the next question is going to be more environmental, by I'm guessing. The MMT has, you mentioned the balance sheet, and MMT at the core looks at zero and credit and debit above and below it. And for every amount of credit, there's a debtor, and every, for the debtors, there's the creditors. The idea is, I'm wondering, and there's a lot of good insight in economics that comes from that perspective. And Michael Hudson and Steve Keen borrows from it also, but Steve Keen does not go along with some of their basic thinking, although he's a friend to it. Michael Kumoff in 2016 wrote the paper Why Banks Are Not Intermediaries and Why It Matters. That was an important paper, and I think MMT has to deal at some point with that paper, and we're not getting that response from them. So given that paper, how do we reconcile and how do we work with MMT in the monetary issue, and acknowledging they have good economic analysis, But often in the monetary world of a moral banking system, money is not neutral in that way, and it really doesn't come from the government right now, as Kumhoff points out very clearly. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, okay, thanks for the question. So, it's a lot of stuff. We've reached, I'm sure you folks will probably know the Modern Money Network, MMT. Yeah, so that's Rohan Gray's organization, and they ran the conference. And I've been talking to Rohan is his name, yeah. Quite a lot, and he's open-minded, but also has this property that like lots of MMTers share, which you guys are all very familiar with, which is that they talking to them, it feels like he's just waiting for you to give up and adopt his point of view, and everything will be great. And it's just not going to happen because we're not MMTers, so we're our own. But what we're trying to do is prevent that from causing problems, because it just doesn't matter from a day-to-day interaction most of the time when you were trying to deal with the real policy things, especially, you spoke briefly about the US context and the UK context. And we're a UK-based campaign and research organisation, so we're going to talk about things that matter in the UK banking system and money system, which is by all means an austerity, but we also want to, we need to break up these massive 4 banks that control everything, and we're not going to stop talking about that just because MMT thinks that if you restrict a bank, then you might still have a shadow banking sector. Like, that's just, into my mind, that is then completely missing the point of what we're trying to do in the here and now. How did they react? So I didn't play like a massive card and say, I'm here, I'm Positive Money UK at the conference. I just mostly went to meet people and to learn and to see. You might think of it as like half sort of diplomacy, half infiltration, like just trying to see what's going on here. It is quite US context based, and definitely the fact that, as I said, it branched into organisation and campaigning chat implied to me that they're really thinking about this in terms of their own political context, your own political context. But Rowan definitely appreciated the presence, and he has written a paper called Macquarie Implications. Which will catch up the push towards digital currency and the merits of having this ability for retail banking that's basically provided by the state, the way that could sort of serve as a countervailing force against the present banking system.
Okay, we have to move to the
Right, there's a lot of things.
Just tell them it's disruptive.
it's just disrupting a bit. You're back, you're in and out, but we'll move to the last question from Howard Switzer, who's been deeply involved with the Green Party policy platform development and seeing off a, well, he can talk to you about it.
Yeah, hi Rob. Greatly appreciate you talking about greening the Bank of England, and of course green policy is what we're very interested in, and of course the Green Party has always been focused mostly on fiscal policy and that side of the equation, and tax policy and stuff. But we did get a monetary reform plank back in 2010 put into our platform. But this past summer we had a group of MMT enthusiasts who were not really Green Party members, but there were a couple of Green Party members involved, but they brought in some MMT people to try and brought in 6 proposals that would change the economic policy of the Green Party and remove our monetary reform plank. And I just wanted to say that I think as big money also dominates the public narrative through the media, by ownership of the media, that it seemed to me that this was an effort by big money to dominate the narrative about monetary reform and kind of blunt our efforts. And so I just wanted to caution you, and it sounds to me like you are already quite cautious about dealing with MMT, but I think there's not much hope of being turned. We have lots of trampled olive branches in our bag.
So thanks for the remarks. I would just sort of add, I expect it's going to be a final comment, because I know you guys are running behind time, but I just add that this is not some enormous, massive pivot and like a strategic, diplomatic, like, epoch opening here. It's really popular. We had a supporters day in the UK.
That's why they're doing it.
And several people said, what do you guys think about MMT? And like, they were real core supporters of Positive Money UK who were kind of had some doubts and were like, I don't really know. I've heard about MMT. I need to be reassured that, it's like, the bits that I like are consistent with what you guys are talking about, and the bits that
Let me reassure you.
the bits that are Positive Money that I like and I can hold on to. And we just wanted to find out, write some blogs to really sort of reassure that supporter base. But also, if you write a blog about MMT, goes on Twitter, you get loads of views, right? This is like a really it's just a tactic as well in order to kind of boost ourselves up this agenda. So I really wouldn't worry, guys, that we're just
Focus on the
there's
outcomes.
some major like capitulation is happening over in London.
Thank you.
It's really interesting. I think it's a great time. People are really, really interested in money, and they're really, really interested in like how the world could be different, just with like a few minor tweaks. That's what we're all about. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yes,
it's a positive thing.
Thank you, Rob.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, we've got to move on now, but thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention. Nice to meet you all. Have a
Yeah.
good conference.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Yes, you did.
Okay, well that went pretty well, better than I thought it might have been a few days ago. I was expecting some sort of storm.
It ain't over
I
yet.
can't say.
That's right. It's not
it's-
over. Ain't over yet,
it's-
Jamie.
Yeah, okay, sorry. But our next speaker is Sue Peters, who's been involved with that AMI for a long time and has developed her own groups in New York City. And Sue went along to that same conference that Rob went to. So, and Sue has been deeply involved with the repelling the move by the people that Howard was talking about to remove the monetary reform plank from the Green Party platform. Sue, Howard, and Joe, and a number of others here. They made it. They put on a heroic effort to defeat some pretty heavy artillery. So, at the end we'll give a round of applause for Sue and for everyone else involved in that effort. And now we'll hear it from Sue herself. Please welcome Sue Peters.
Thank you. I want Joe to stand up. Howard to stand up. Because the three of us, for the time being, have repelled MMT from taking our monetary reform out of our platform. Our platform has the NEED Act in it. And that's why MMT is coming into the party. So this is the recent history of MMT in the Green Party. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to first give you a history of greening the dollar, which is our monetary reform in the National Green Party platform. And then MMT started coming into the Green Party, the National Green Party in 2017, last year. I'll talk about how they proceeded. It's a good study of how their ideas are inserted into the conversations and take over. And then this year, how Joe and Howard and I dealt with what was going on with changing the platform in the National Party. And then future organizing, which I'm hoping people might want to join us. Okay, here we go. Part one, the history of greening the dollar. So these two Missouri Greens, Ben Jelsis and Dee Berry, met and heard Stephen Zerling to give a talk on monetary reform in Kansas City, Missouri. And he went there twice, in the year 2000 and in the year 2007. I mean, Stephen, you can pick up from the conference, he was going around always finding people and talking to them. And this had this magnificent result. Dee Berry said, I was impressed with what I heard for those 2 times and saw the fit with the Green Party. She was very active, has a long history with the Green Party. And Stephen, because of all that, in Reading, Pennsylvania, the annual meeting of the National Green Party, Stephen came and gave a panel. Greening the Dollar, it was called, How Monetary Reform Could Restore and Solidify Our Democracy. And Dee said, well received, but we realized it required considerable educational process for the Green Party. Because remember, the Green Party is like any ordinary American. They haven't been taught what a monetary system is. So, this, let me just say as an aside, this MMT coming into the Green Party gave us a chance to start that education in depth with some of the party people, and we're trying to keep that going. And I'm sure MMT will force us to keep it going. So Dee Berry and Stephen Zerling worked together to educate Greens and add greening the dollar to the national platform. And there's a real process to that. The Green Party is a very grassroots organization. Things come up from the county organizations to the state. And the state Green Party is really where the consensus is. And then it goes up to the national party. Okay. So Dee said, the monetary system is an invisible system. People are made to think they can't understand it. And Ben said, the Greens have a systems approach for serious problem change. The AMI message can contribute tremendously. Because remember, our message is it's a system, and we need to change the system to help our society. So in 2010, the national platform got the basics of our monetary reform. This is just what was in the platform in 2010. And this was the work of Dee Green, Ben Jelsis, and some other women in the Missouri Greens and around the country in other Green parties. It's a slow process of, you have to educate the 100+ members of the National Committee who are going to vote on the platform. So there's a whole process of education. And I love, if you listen to Dee on the video, where she explains this, She said she had so much fun working with these other women around the country, getting this into the platform. I thought that was great, you know. It can be fun. Monetary reform can be enjoyable. Okay, so in 2010, we had the crisis in our financial system makes it imperative that we restructure our monetary system. It is both possible and necessary for our government to take back its special money creation privilege and the privilege banks now have to create money. Okay, that was in the platform, 2010. 2012, it was even more. The 3 non-negotiables were put into the platform under greening the dollar and called greening the dollar. So we have nationalized the 12 Federal Reserve banks, and the privileged banks now have to create money, and new money added, fair distribution across the United States, creating good jobs. Now, here's Howard Switzer. Howard is, what, 17 years in the Green Party, right? And how many years have you been on the National Committee?
17.
17. So here we have a voice for our monetary reform on the National Committee of the party.
Yeah, yeah.
And as Howard said, to have control of public policy, the public must control the monetary system. So, Howard was a 2001 founding member of the Tennessee Green Party. And in 2007, he heard Stephen Zerlinga talk at Reading, Pennsylvania. And in 2013, Stephen called him up and invited Howard to this conference. And at the conference, Howard bought The Lost Science of Money. And he started reading it. And since reading it, he's been a constant presence on the GP National Committee listserv, which is going on all the time. Different issues come up to be decided on by these 100+ members. He's connecting issues caused by the bank-run monetary system to the solutions in greening the dollar. Very important that he's been doing that. In 2015, at this conference here, the Greens were offered a discount to come to the conference. And Howie Hawkins was the keynote speaker. He's a very well-known Green candidate in New York State. And Howie knows the monetary system. And he gave a keynote speech at that conference on the history of third parties in U.S. history, including the Greenback Party. Most third parties have dealt with the monetary system. And he knows the history very well. And after Howie's talk, during the Q&A, we asked him, Howie, what should we do next? Because there were, I think, 40% of the audience that year were Greens. And his answer was, create a website to teach people about money and about the NEED Act in the Green Party national platform. But one thing, keep it simple. So here is the website. From that meeting, a group of people kept meeting, and we created it, and we have our webmaster back there. Stand up. This is that's Alan Smith from New York, and Alan has been our webmaster, totally voluntary. And he knows the money system. He teaches at the Henry George School. He teaches about the monetary system. So, and this, we kept it very simple. I encourage everyone to go look at it. And we're always pointing Greens to it who don't know. And so, this is a way to understand it. It's very simple. Okay, so 2017, MMT into the Green Party. In my experience, the first thing that happened was David Cobb's internet show. Now, David Cobb is a longtime Green, very well known nationally. He ran, I think, for president in 2004.
Yes.
Yeah. And he's a very dynamic man, he's very active, and he has an internet show on Green News Network, and he interviews. So he called me up and he said, I'm very confused about all the monetary stuff. I want to interview you to represent AMI and Warren Mosler to represent MMT and Phil McRee, I forget his first name, for public money. He said, but I don't want you to debate. He said, I want each of you to talk 10 minutes about what you're saying to the public, about the monetary system. And that's what we did. And this is a Walt McRee, yeah. So that's what we did. There wasn't much of a debate, but it was, I thought, helpful for people to hear, very different points of view. And then, and that was, when was that? March. So in July, the National Green Party had their annual meeting in Newark. And MMT had a panel. This is the first panel they've given. And I'll just read this is the description of from the Newark meeting. Modern monetary theory is the empirically based explanation of how a monetarily sovereign economic system works. As the United States has a sovereign currency system, etc., etc. So, and I went to that meeting, and I always have a hard time because I'll go to meetings and I'll say, don't ask any questions, because I don't trust myself. But I did ask a question, and it got me into a little trouble. But anyway, I'll show you. Okay, so here's the panel. That is
Steve Grumbine.
what's his name?
Steve Grumbine.
Steve Grumbine from Real Progressives. So he was the speaker. And the theme of the MMT talk, the U.S. has a sovereign monetary system and is the sole issuer of the currency, is one of the themes. And politicians are to blame because they do not know or choose to ignore the government's power to create money. Those are the themes. Okay. This is the interaction I had. Steve Grumbine was talking about QE. And he said, QE is nothing more than rearranging the chairs on the deck. And I said, no, when the Federal Reserve banks create reserves and buy bad debt off the multinational banks, this QE is making the banks stronger. Steve Grumbine said, QE does not add new net financial assets. That's an MMT term. It's just shifting debt around, nothing more. So at this point, one of the audience in the front row indicated to Steve Grumbine with his hand to just go on, don't answer any more of her questions. It was a little unsettling, but not unusual with my experience with MMT. 2018, okay, this year, MMT submits multiple amendments to GP US National Platform. So in April, the Nebraska State Party asked the National Party if they could have 2 advisors on the National Committee listserv, because Nebraska, the one state party alone, had submitted multiple amendments about monetary reform to the National Platform Committee, and they wanted 2 advisors. Now, there is in the bylaw, you can have advisors, but it's not used very much at all. To submit changes to the national platform, first they go to the platform committee from the state, and then they have to be approved by the steering committee to be discussed and opened up to the national committee, and then these 130 plus members get a chance to vote on it. So by consensus, the steering committee of the National Party approved these 2 advisors, Fadhel Kabu and Dr. Joseph Firestone, which as far as I know, Joe and Howard are MMT proponents, right? They represent a voice of MMT. Okay. So Howard sent a written request saying, well, I'd like to have 2 advisors also for the AMI point of view, for the platform point of view. And consensus couldn't be found about it, so they had to take a vote. And thank goodness, the vote supported myself and Joe in helping Howard and joining him. It's much better to be a team. Okay, so in June and July, and there were 7 different amendments taken from Nebraska and submitted, but I'm only going to talk about 5 of them because the other 2 are kind of minor and I don't have too much time. Okay. So I just want to say, before we begin, AMI 1. All 5 Nebraska MMT platform changes were voted down by the National Committee.
All right.
Yeah.
You want to stop now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Sue will go through those details with us and then answer questions on detailed points after our next speaker.
We ended at a good point.
Yeah, yeah. Our next speaker has to get away at 12:30, so